Hello and welcome to this latest episode of the Energy Insiders podcast. My name is Giles Parkinson. I'm the editor-in-chief of Renew Economy, and joining me, as usual, is ITK Principal David Leach with a sleeping teddy bear for those watching on video. This podcast has started well, but we do have a very good guest, David, former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull.
Superman would like to listen a little bit too. He loves the podcast.
For those listening on audio and not on video, David has a yes.
One of my grandkids' toys that he keeps wanting back, but I say you can't have it.
Well, there you go.
The Guardian is the guardian of the mic. But go on.
I was trying to introduce our guest, former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull. Has got quite a few serious subjects to discuss. One of them being hydro, the second one being the state of politics in Australia, and also some observations about some of the international goings on, particularly in the US with Donald Trump. And it seems a good time to talk to Malcolm Turnbull about hydro. He's making a presentation in Canberra next week, and we'll be talking to politicians, getting the right signals out there to build more pumped hydro, which he insists, I think quite rightly, needs to be built. But as we will discuss later in the podcast, facing a lot of competition from battery storage and batteries doing 8 and 10 hours of storage, which wasn't quite expected a few years ago. Anyway, David, let's hear our conversation with Malcolm Turnbull.
Yeah, no, great to be with you. Good to see you.
We very much look forward to sort of having a discussion about politics, because the state of politics is possibly more remarkable than I can remember it ever being. But let's first get on to the energy situation.
Certainly more. Certainly the energy transition, which many have said is going in a rather bumpy fashion, is looking fantastic compared to the state of politics, and certainly on the centre-right side of politics.
Well, at least it's looking sane, so...
It is, yeah. I know.
You, since stepping down from the role as Prime Minister, I'm not too sure what that was followed. Stepping down, I'm not too sure what the right word, but anyway.
Yeah, being defenestrated is...
Defenestrated. Very good. You spent a lot of time in the last couple of years pushing the hydro, which of course is something that you did while you were in government. Of course, yep. You're responsible, I think, for the initial stages of Snowy 2.0. You've been personally invested in pumped hydro projects, a couple that you sold to AGL a year or so ago, and you have been chairman of the International Hydro Association and Pumped Hydro Advisory Board.
I'm the president of the IHA, actually.
Okay, fair enough. What's changed in technologies over the last 10 years? Does pumped hydro still stand as snowflakes against battery storage and the cost of that coming down?
Oh, look, yeah, the answer is yes. I mean, chemical batteries are doing a great job with storage of shorter durations. But when you're talking about storage durations of, 10, 12, 24 plus hours, pumped hydro is still, remains the most cost effective. The other great asset that pumped hydro has is that it is a, 100-year plus asset. In fact, it's that understates that the electromechanical parts of a pumped hydro project, you can get probably 50, 60 years out of that. The civils, can last forever. I mean, hundreds of years. So you're, assuming they're maintained, of course. So you're talking about very long-lived assets, they're also sovereign assets. You're not relying on foreign technology to create them.
We can pour our own cement, which is very useful.
Correct. We can dig our own holes. Yeah, I mean, I get obviously you are importing. I'm not trying to be some kind of nativist anti-globalist, but there is a big sovereign self-reliance part, and this by the way is why India is promoting pumped hydro as a national priority.
Yeah. I'm going to guess in Australia, one of the issues has been, and we've seen sort of battery storage and its duration sort of extend out to 8 hours, and we've seen a tender in New South Wales this week, which has sort of allowed, it's a long duration storage tender only to 8 hours. It's been picked up by 6 battery projects. So pumped hydro, and you say that pumped hydro has a long lifetime, and indeed it does. One of the issues we have at the moment is that we've got an energy transition which is and needs to happen quite quickly, and batteries are quicker to build. So how do we make sure, and I don't think it's deniable that pumped hydro has a role in the system, because as you say, those longer durations of storage, the 12, 24 hours and possibly longer. How do we get that built? Because it's proven pretty hard. Snowy 2.0 has blown out in cost. We've seen a reasonable success. I think we haven't seen it actually operating yet up in up in North Queensland with the Gen X one at Kidston. What do we need to do? You're meeting with politicians next week, I understand. What are you going to be doing?
Well, look. The key thing is we've got to make sure our policies work. You can build pumped hydro. It's very straightforward if the government decides to build it, like I did with Snowy 2.0. That's straightforward. And there's a good argument for governments building long-lived assets like that, and that was what the Queensland government was doing with their hydro projects, although there's uncertainty around them now with the change of government. But if you want the private sector to build pumped hydro, you've got to recognise that the existing market signals are not really sufficient. You've got to first decide how much you want, and then you've got to make sure that you get it built. And I think it requires innovative policies that just recognise that, and that, so what are the characteristics of a pumped hydro as a developer? Firstly, it has very significant upfront costs because of all the geotechnical work that you've got to do. So that is one feature. And secondly, obviously, there's the high civil costs, but counted against that is the very long life. Now, the problem is that the classic discounted cash flow models that value assets do not really provide you much recognition for returns that are 20, 30, 40, 50, let alone 100 years hence. But I think when you're looking at building infrastructure as a government, or for whether the government's paying for it or it's procuring it, you've got to think in very long terms. I mean, there's very little infrastructure that will pay for itself within a 10-year period. I mean, particularly linear infrastructure. I mean, think of metros, railways, water infrastructure. All of this is long-term investment, and these pumped hydro projects are the same.
If I looked, you mentioned you're the president of the International Hydro Association, which is, I'm interested. We don't talk about hydro enough, and nor do I. I always like to hear what's going on around the world. You mentioned India, but what's the if you were to run around the world, what would you say about the level of interest in various countries?
Well, okay, so last year, global hydropower generation jumped about 10% to roughly 4,600 terawatt hours. In terms of capacity, about 24.6 gigawatts of new capacity was added in 2024, including about 8.4 gigawatts, about a third, if pumped storage, most of which was in China. China's added about 14.4 gigawatts of new hydropower capacity in 2024. So, as I said, most of that was pumped hydro. It's on a track to exceed 120 gigawatt pumped storage target by 2030, and that's capacity as opposed to storage. So Europe's catching up. It's got a pumped storage project pipeline of about 32 gigawatts in the EU. The US has got funding that, I mean, interestingly, the Trump administration likes hydro, so it's one renewable they like. And there's a number of pumped hydro projects in the United States, but I would say it's early days. And of course, in Australia, there's a lot going on. We've got obviously Snowy 2 and Kidston are the two that are under construction, but there's a lot of other projects in the pipeline. But they have to be brought to, that they've got to get built. So, the projects we sold, the Glenbourne and Glenny's projects, we sold to AGL, and Turnbull Renewables is still very involved with them, both financially and providing development services. But geotechnical work is going on. Even as I was up there on Monday, at Glenbourne, and they're drilling away. So trying to find out what that rock's like at deep levels.
It's quite hard because I know Origin.
It is. The rock is very hard, actually.
Oh, sorry. Yes, thank you.
Which is a great relief.
That's my kind of joke. Thanks very much, Malcolm.
Thank you. I couldn't resist. Tom Nielsen would not have forgiven me if I had not jumped in on that.
That's right. I know that Origin at Shoalhaven ended up not extending their own pumped hydro project there because of qualities with the rock. And of course, in Queensland, there's the Barumba project, which again is a very large capital expenditure. I guess also while we're just on the technology of what's long duration storage, and I personally think long duration just means that it's cheap storage because you can't afford to put enough power in to make it shorter duration storage. But I'll come back to that. Compressed air seems to be an emerging technology that competes in the longer durations now.
Well, yeah. I mean, I guess it's a beyond experimental, but there's not, there's not a huge amount of it around. I know there's a project out near Broken Hill that's got an LTESA agreement, but I think, look, I hope it works. I mean, listen, I'm in favour of all sorts of storage. I'm just concerned that I tell you what does concern me about when people talk about things like compressed air and various other new ideas, and I'm not against new ideas, quite the contrary. We've got to be careful of not falling into the trap of what I call technological Macauberism. You know how Mr. Macauber and David Copperfield, who was always broke, would say, "Don't worry, he'd say to his wife, something will turn up, something will turn up." And I just worry when people say, "Oh, we don't have to make the investments to build this project now because some new technology is going to come around the corner."
It'll be right on the day.
Yeah. And I just feel my very strong sense is that we're going to need a lot more electricity than we think we're going to need. That's one factor. And I think, obviously the whole data center story is adding to that. The other thing is that we are going to have a renewable mix that has got much more solar in it relative to wind than we had earlier assumed. Mm. And you will, I haven't got the figures right in front of me, but you'll see that the assumptions we had about the amount of percentage of wind we were going to have have not been borne out. We've got a lot more solar, and that's because obviously it's cheaper, it's easier to roll out. It doesn't get as many objections from people because, if you put a 200-metre wind turbine on top of a hill, everyone can see it. A solar farm is much less objectionable or likely to be objected to. And, of course, you add to that rooftop solar. Now, the more solar you have versus wind, the more storage you need. Because, so that's kind of obvious. So I think we're going to need more.
Actually, can I just make a technical comment?
Yes, please.
You need the storage every day. So I would put it that because solar is far more predictable than wind. It's because the sun always shines every day, or it has so far.
Yeah, but it doesn't always shine at the same rate every day.
No, but bear me out. But for that reason, the storage that you install or need to install can be predicted with a high degree of confidence. And what you will find is that the capacity utilization of that storage is high because every day the sun goes down and you need the storage every night.
That's right.
By contrast, in a wind-heavy system, most of the time you won't need very much storage because the wind blows at night as well as during the day. But a wind drought is far more severe than a solar drought. So you need the backup storage then. So in fact, wind pushes you towards gas, whereas solar pushes you towards battery and perhaps pumped hydro. But that's just a technical observation.
Yeah, I'm not...
Interesting one.
I think there's a lot of merit in that. But, the time when we get the wind droughts in Australia is in winter, southern Australia, where we also have low radiation. So you get, we get our own Aussie Dunkelflaute, low radiation and low wind. I think just getting back to this issue of the distinction between power, or capacity and energy or storage. The AEMO's step change pathway calls for us to have by 2050 an additional 49 gigawatts of stored dispatchable storage and 646 gigawatt hours of energy. So 49 gigawatts of power, 646 gigawatts of energy. Snowy represents about half the gigawatt hours required. Snowy too, 350. But it's only 2.2 out of 49 of the power of the capacity.
Yep.
And I think that's what the point you're making is a very valid one. It's all very well to have a lot of storage, but when you're trying to address the demands of the whole NEM, you are going to need a lot more, for example, than just 2.2 gigawatts.
Your point that we needed a portfolio. Now, I want to shift the conversation slightly because you talked about energy independence. And if I think about the transition more broadly, Australia imports about $40 billion worth of oil on a net basis.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that if national policy did care about energy independence, we could go a lot harder on electrifying transport. I was wondering if you had a view about that.
I think that's a very powerful. I think that's very powerful argument. I agree with it. I think the best way for us to, one of the best ways to deal with our oil security problem is to reduce our demand for oil. And clearly the electrification of the transport fleet is an obvious avenue there. I mean, the EVs are now so much cheaper than they were, say, 10 years ago. I mean, and getting cheaper. I think that is going to be a big opportunity for us.
And in the long run, it would probably improve our balance of trade. After all, it doesn't cost any more to import an EV than it does to import a petrol car. And once you've done it, you don't import the oil, and you improve your trade balance by significantly as well.
You're absolutely right there too. I think it makes a huge amount of sense. We're now at the point where you've got so much increasing competition in the EV market, and the prices are coming down.
And so generally, it seems to me, again, spreading the agenda a little bit, that the general decarbonisation of Australia, besides being something that is a moral sort of thing and backed by all the science, in the end, doing it we're going to lose our fossil fuel exports. But it's better, isn't it, to be prepared to face up to the longer term as early as possible and to move towards where we have to go to at a reasonable pace.
Cool, of course, that's exactly right. I mean, the Port of Newcastle will stop exporting coal not because of a decision by an Australian government, but because the overseas markets have moved away from burning coal to, using another form of energy. That's and if we care about that'd be sad for the Australian coal miners. We all want to live we want to have a planet that survives, and we definitely need to stop burning fossil fuels.
I keep thinking about the future generations, which is a phrase I first heard from a politician, but as an accounting person, I've been a good steward of our world. Matters to me. But
yeah,
let me just, and Giles may not like this, but since you're a very great expert on politics, quite obviously, I'd like, what could be done? I have a lot of questions. I look at the LNP as an organisation in Queensland, and I personally see that as the root cause of a lot of the problems on the coalition side of politics. What can be done to regather the traditional threads of the Liberal government that I guess you led, that I grew up understanding, a belief in capitalism, in democracy, equal opportunity, a safety net, markets and competition. We seem to have strayed, and the rational science and economic side of things, the side that I guess a lot of people appealed to Middle Australia, appealed to business. We seem to have drifted a long way from that.
Yeah, we have. Look, I'll give you my diagnosis of what the problem is. I think the Liberal Party, and this applies to the Nats as well, and it particularly applies to the LNP, which of course is a combination of both in Queensland, is that they have over time become more and more captured by that right-wing populist message, or that echo chamber, largely represented by the media that Rupert Murdoch owns, Sky News being the best example. And so they're in this little echo chamber where they're literally in a parallel universe. And so they're interested in culture war issues. They're not really interested in economics in any meaningful sense. It's sort of tribal culture war politics. And so that's, that was the group in the coalition or in the Liberal Party that was always my problem. I didn't have too much problem with the Labor Party. I mean, obviously they wanted to get me out of office, and, had a fair crack at it in 2016. But the people that really gave me grief were the right-wingers and their friends in the right-wing media in the Liberal Party. And so this mob have managed to get control of the Liberal Party. In the process, they've lost most of their most affluent urban electorates, and most of their urban electorates, full stop. And they've basically burnt the show to the ground. And I don't know how they can get out of that hole. I mean, I worry that the Liberal Party is facing an existential crisis now. Now, if you'd said that a few years ago, you would have been sounding like an alarmist. But I think part of their problem is their membership, their branch membership has atrophied, and is increasingly full of people who live in that same, Sky News, right-wing sort of media landscape. I mean, there's the Ted O'Brien, who's the deputy leader of the Liberal Party, member for a Sunshine Coast electorate, I think Fairfax,
where one of my daughters lives. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, fair enough. And he's a smart, sensible guy. I've known him for years. Quite progressive. Used to be at one point he was chairman of the Republican movement, so he's hardly a black-hearted reactionary. But I remember in 2018, Ted was very apologetic for having supported Dutton. And he said to me that he didn't have any choice because he said, I've quoted this in my book, it's quite revealing, really. He said that it was as though his branch members were having a meeting with Peter Credlin and Alan Jones every night.
Yeah.
And so this is a guy who is absolutely not a Peter Dutton sort of person, but he felt, and you could say he should have been stronger or not as weak or whatever, but he was a politician, he was trying to survive, so he swept along with that. And this is the problem: this is where they've got to now. In our system, we have compulsory voting, we have preferential voting. Our politics is mediated at the centre, And if you're living in that landscape and saying things that make them happy on Sky News, that's great if that's your objective in life. But if your objective is to win an election, then you're not going to be able to do it. I mean, take the war on renewables. I mean, think about this. Think how mad it is to be having a culture war against renewables. You're out there saying renewables are terrible. They make power more expensive. We've got to burn more coal. Okay, that's what you hear on Sky News. As you guys know better than anyone, well over a third of Australian homes have got solar panels on the roof. I reckon there is barely one person in Australia who either doesn't have solar panels on their home or knows somebody who does. So we're all familiar with it. Increasingly, people are getting home batteries. There's been an explosion in that too. So Australians are not doing that because electricity it's making electricity more expensive. They understand that renewables are, properly deployed, etc., will make electricity less expensive. They get that. And so waging a war on renewables as though it's like some kind of satanic fetish, which is how it sounds when Barnaby Joyce talks about it, is just at odds with the lived experience of most Australians.
So why do they push this then? I mean, is it because of Peter Credlin and Sky After Dark, or is it because of their sponsors of their parties? I mean, we're now seeing extraordinarily One Nation with 28% or 26% or whatever it is in poll numbers. I mean, I don't think they're seriously going to form government, but we probably never thought that Tony Abbott would form government either. But
well, let me two things. I think it's largely a culture war thing. I mean, for reasons.
But what does that mean, a culture war thing?
Well, it means that you take something.
Identity.
Exactly, identity. Instead of something being the subject of, physics, engineering, economics, like the discussion we were having, is, how does pumped hydro compete with batteries, like that. These are all good practical discussion to have. But once you leave that behind and it becomes ideological, then you're treating it like an argument about religion. And this is where energy has been in the eyes of the right-wing media in Australia and the United States for far too long. And so that's part of it. Is the support of the coal industry part of it? Yes, I'm sure it is. Absolutely. I mean, the National Party, and I say this as a farmer, the National Party is far more dedicated to supporting the coal mining industry than it is to supporting farmers, and that's a great shame. But I think that the fundamental problem is that they're at odds, as I said, with the lived experience. With not only at odds with the science, but they're at odds with the lived experience of most Australians.
You talked about the sort of decline of the Liberal Party, and we sort of wonder if there's any moderates left there now. I mean, I think
many.
Tim Wilson's described as a moderate, and he used to be the policy director at the Institute of Public Affairs.
The only sort of progressive cause Tim's ever been in favour of is legalising gay marriage.
And Tim's future, like many a politician, speaking as a dad, as one who had a dad's one. But this doesn't mean, the fact that there aren't many moderates left doesn't mean that there isn't a market for a moderate party.
Exactly.
I wrote 16 years ago suggesting that you create, it was actually a fantasy, sort of a future prediction, that you created the Liberal Environment Party and and became Prime Minister. I can't remember who you're in coalition with now. Liberal Environment Party and someone else.
Well, I do think, we shouldn't interrupt, but I do think people like at a state level, your Matt Keens, your Gladys Berejiklian, your John Hewson, who was never Prime Minister, but arguably shares similar views. I mean, I reckon there's a market out there, and under the right banner, it would be really hard work.
Well, are they called the teals?
Yeah, well, I absolutely agree with you. There is a market there for that. I mean, there is a great big looming, yawning gap in Australian politics for the sensible centre, small L Liberal sensible centre. The Labor Party, by the way, would say they feel that. I mean, Andrew Leigh, who's one of the smartest people I know, and economics professor and so forth, Andrew will make a very compelling case to say that the Labor Party is actually the real small L Liberal Party in Australian politics today.
I agree with that.
But it's certainly closer to the centre of politics than the Liberal Party is, for sure.
Okay.
But I do, but having said that, we need a political system where there are at least two viable parties of government. It doesn't matter how good a party is, you don't want them in government forever, and you certainly don't want them thinking they can be in government forever.
What about a European type thing where you have numerous sort of partnerships, coalitions, and things like that?
I don't.
Can Australia can Australia need to get its head around that? I don't know.
Well, it's interesting. And I mean, as a former leader of a big party, I've always said, don't vote for independence. You don't want to have a hung parliament. Chaos. I've always said that, but possibly haven't been very convincing when I've said it. But when you think about it, if you think of the 43rd Parliament, which was a hung parliament, this is when most of that time Gillard was PM. The instability was not caused by the crossbench. It was caused by Kevin Rudd wanting to, take revenge on Julia. I mean, the instability was all going on in the Labor caucus because of Kevin and Kevin and Julia. And so, yeah, you never have a majority in the Senate, but you work with the crossbenchers. So I don't have a problem with coalition governments. I mean, the coalition is a coalition after all. But I do think the real question, I think, for the Teals is how long do they want to just be feisty independents? And when do they actually going to? When does Allegra Spender and Kate Cheney and Zali and Monique and Sophie and so forth? When do they say, when is their proposition not simply vote for me? I'm a smart, brilliant, clever person, and I'm going to do a great job as a feisty independent on the crossbench. When do they say, vote for me, I want to be Prime Minister or Treasurer or Defence Minister or something like that?
And politics is all about concentrating power ultimately, isn't it? Really, you work up from the electorates to the party, to the cabinet, to the Prime Minister. Yeah. And even when you look at the Teals, I'm not that aware of the policy processes, but I would believe that they would have more resources if they were grouped as a party than sitting each independently.
Yes, well, I think they'd be. I think so, and I think also that there will be, and I can say this. Let me speak about the electorate of Wentworth, which I'm very familiar. I've lived there my whole life, represented it for 14 years. There would be a lot of people in Wentworth who would look at Allegra Spender and say, "You're a fantastic politician. You've got a first-class honours degree in economics. You're really eloquent, but I want to see you on the front bench, not on the crossbench. Crossbench is fine. You've got into Parliament. That's great, but when are we going to see you, being, the shadow treasurer or the treasurer or the Prime Minister?" I mean, and I think those people who share those kind of centrist, smaller liberal, pro-business, pro-free market, but nonetheless environmentally responsible and socially progressive values, which is kind of where I sit, certainly, and that I think where a lot of Australians do. I think that's essentially where the centre of Australia sits. Those people really need to be able to see, an alternative government group or party that is not, alternative to the Labor Party. Yeah, and it could, because you don't want here's the thing: you don't want the alternative to Labor to be One Nation. Now, the Labor Party would say, "Oh, we love that because we'll all get elected." But the problem is, that's leaving a lot of people unspoken for, but also you run the risk that one day,
be elected.
One day, that's right. The only alternative if people are just so fed up with Labor that they'll just go for whatever the alternative is, and you end up with, a crazy right-wing party, I don't think that's viable. here because I think our politics is centred.
A place where it's not centred at the moment is the US, and I must ask you about Donald Trump. I mean, you've obviously met him, you've had a chance to sort of appraise the man in person. The things he's done in his just over a year of office now are quite extraordinary. Tell us about how you approach how people should think about Trump, because there's lots of people thinking about this is unusual, but it's still politics as normal. Other people still saying, look, this is not politics as normal. It's very different, and something needs to be done about it. Goodness knows what. Yes, leave it there.
Well, look, okay. Here's the problem with Trump from our point of view. Trump's values are more in line with those of Vladimir Putin than they are with any of his modern predecessors as president. And he doesn't make any bones that they're not. He doesn't pretend they're not, right? He look at the National Defense Strategy of the United States, published a couple of weeks ago.
The Monroe Doctrine.
Well, the Donroe Doctrine.
Yes.
It describes the international rules-based order as a, quote, cloud castle abstraction, unquote. Now, that's the international rules-based order which the United States largely set up after the Second World War, designed ostensibly to ensure that might was not right. Trump believes might is right. He doesn't. And it's not as though he believes it but pretends he doesn't. He says he doesn't believe. He says he believes that might is right.
As long as he personally doesn't have to fight for it, and as long as the person he's exerting his might over is very small and he can bully them.
Correct. True. But that's right. He wants to win. So his approach is he will bully smaller countries and middle-sized countries. And when he tried bullying tactics with China, he ran aground, didn't he? When they said, okay, how does no magnets sound? How does that sound? We'll give you a number, 0. How do I think about that? And so the bottom line is it is totally discombobulating, because with the United States that we've been used to is led by a guy whose values are very different. And it's not just that he's transactional, but he's got a different view of the world. I mean, he sees people who depend on him or depend on the US, and this applies to us, obviously, with our defense ties, as that dependence makes us vulnerable and gives him leverage to get something out of the other party. So, you can see this is how he uses tariffs and trade, military leverage, and it's and it is all about using that leverage to advantage the United States at the expense of other countries. Now, a cynic would say the world's always been like that. Trump's just being honest and, saying the quiet bits out loud. But whether you take that approach or another one, the fact is it's very different to what we've been used to.
It's a bit more naked than what we're used to. And that brings us on to Mark Carney's speech, which was kind of sets out an alternative way forward for a middle power. It reminds me of ancient Greece when it had to fight Persia and the role of the islands in the Aegean as the sort of little middle powers in that war. But my question is, do you think Australia should be advocating more for? I don't believe we've got anyone in Australia that actually could make the speech that Mark Carney made. But should we be expressing such sentiments in the same way, or should we be adopting this, let's be very quiet and not lift our head over the parapet unless we have to?
Well, we do have someone. He's on this podcast, but he's not anymore.
Well, Carney's speech, which I thought was outstanding, is very, very, very similar in its approach to the essay I had in Foreign Affairs in June or July last year. I mean, and the proposition is that this is a big disruption. This is not a blip. Middle powers have got to band together. Those of us who share the same values should band together, and that applies to security as it does to economics. We should not be sucking up to Trump. That only results in more bullying. And these are all the sort of points that Carney was making, and very eloquently. And yes, I do think Australia, that's the approach Australia should be taking. This doesn't mean cutting off relations with America or, cancelling ANZUS or anything like that. But what it does mean is recognising that we have got to be much more self-reliant, and we have got to put Australia first the way he puts America first. And, unfortunately, there are some people in Australia and some media in Australia that really, and you see this with News Corp particularly, they equate any criticism or reservations or skepticism about America as being akin to treason. I mean, it is literally as though the more deferential to the United States you are, the more likely the Murdoch media is to say you are serving Australia's interest. And so you wonder whether the Australian newspaper should just be called The American. I mean, it's owned by an American, of course, but
I could think of a few other names, but anyway, let's not worry about that.
But this is a big issue, because I mean, you look at something like AUKUS. We have no proper debate on that in Australia, and yet we have made ourselves, or Morrison, now Albanese, has made us, Australia, more dependent on the United States right at the time when the United States is less dependable than ever. And they make it very plain that they are less dependable than ever. And we are in a situation where we will almost certainly end up with no submarines at all. Yeah. And that's part of the deal. I mean, it is so plainly a terrible deal for Australia. We have no guarantee that we're actually going to get any subs out of this.
And we're still paying the money.
And we're sending them the money. The latest Congressional Research Service paper, anyone can read this. Google CRS AUKUS, January 2026. You can see it there. It's a huge research paper. It openly canvasses in the first section that Australia gets no submarines at all, partly because, we're not prepared to, give a commitment that we'll use them against China in a war over Taiwan, but largely because the Americans are not producing enough submarines for their own.
There aren't any subs. That's the main problem.
That's the main problem, exactly. So our government has been so rapturously determined to ingratiate itself with the Americans. It has signed a deal. I mean, you can imagine the contempt Trump has for us for signing such a dumb deal. I mean, he would just be privately so contemptuous. We've signed a deal where we bear the entire risk of the Americans not being able to build enough subs. So in other words, if they're short of subs, we don't get any, and that's part of the deal. We've been done that with open eyes, but we do give them $3 billion US dollars. We do give them a submarine base in Western Australia and a dockyard. So they get all of these goodies that they wanted. And the objective of AUKUS for Australia to have its own nuclear-powered submarines may never happen. And when it doesn't happen, we can't say we was robbed or we've been tricked or, double-crossed, because they can say, look, read the
fine print.
You signed up for it. Well, it's not even in fine print. It's in capital letters, neon lights.
Yeah. Just thinking about sort of whether it's a blip or a disruption. In the normal course of events, the Republicans get smashed in the midterms this year, and President Trump's powers are checked, but that may not happen.
Well, it may not. And the House in particular is so gerrymandered that there aren't actually that many seats that are, really contestable. So, yes, the Republicans could lose their majority, but it'd have to be a very, very big swing for it to be a blowout.
When we might not have midterms.
Pardon?
We might not have midterms.
Well, there is a dark apocalyptic view that, the elections may not happen. But there are so many things happening in America at the moment that is, look at those killings in Minneapolis. I mean, it's just, masked men, masked federal agents shooting citizens in the street. I mean, this is the stuff of a sort of a dystopian movie, isn't it? Really?
They were just very poorly trained. There was no leadership. If anyone hasn't seen the New York Times forensic video evidence of that, which covers it from multiple angles, I urge them to watch it. Malcolm, you've been Prime Minister of Australia. There aren't too many more senior roles. I notice Kevin Rudd has been floated to head up the United Nations. Do you have ambitions yourself now to be anything in public life?
I've reached the pinnacle. I'm the president of the International Hydropower Association.
Well, there you go.
What more is there to realise?
Well, you could be the next Robert Menzies that starts the next party.
The next party, yeah. Well,
makes the Liberals.
Well, I would be starting the next party at this age Robert Menzies was when he retired.
Yes.
So I'm probably, I think I'm probably a bit old for that. But I do think it is. I think there is a big market opportunity there, and I'd certainly, I'm still a member of the Liberal Party, but it is that I thought there should be at least one moderate left there.
I thought the Roseville branch had kicked you out.
Well, they're always the Roseville branch. The Roseville branch is always passing resolutions for me to be expelled. But my distinct recollection is they passed a resolution to have me expelled from the Liberal Party when I was the Prime Minister too. So these are hardcore people. I might have to be corrected on that, but they certainly they didn't like me anymore then.
Look, I think we're getting to the end of this podcast, and if we get back to the original point about hydropower and the meeting that you're having in Canberra this coming week, are there any other comments that that you would like to leave our listeners?
Well, I think the bottom line is we need a lot of storage. We're going to need more than we imagined a few years ago because of the domination of our renewable grid by solar. Pumped hydro offers the opportunity to have very long duration storage in assets that will last for many, many decades, if not centuries. And it should definitely be part of the mix. If we don't get on and build more of it, Giles is absolutely right. We will just end up having to buy in a great rush and at enormous cost, many, many shiploads of batteries, which, have a relatively short lifetime, and we'll pass up on the opportunity to have this, fantastic infrastructure. Now, I know, Snowy 2, which is a unique asset because it's just got so much storage, has taken longer and cost more, but hasn't cost as much more as people say. I mean, but anyway, won't get into that. But
we haven't found that yet, have we?
No, but I mean, infrastructure. This happens to infrastructure projects. I mean, I got two sort of big infrastructure projects going. Got more than two, but the two ones that are most notable: Western Sydney Airport and Snowy 2. Western Sydney Airport finished, on time, on budget. So that was the exception. But the bottom line is, I think we need more pumped hydro, and the ones that follow, like the ones that Turnbull Renewables was developing in the Upper Hunter now with AGL, they are much simpler projects. I mean, they basically involve building a dam on top of a hill next to a big reservoir.
Should we have done that first up rather than Snowy 2.0?
Well, listen, Giles, I think that's a really good argument. That's a good point to make, a good question. I think the attraction of Snowy 2 was just this unique opportunity of two huge reservoirs, 700 metres difference in head, relatively about 20 kilometres away from each other, but the ability to link them gave you such a gigantic battery. But yep, I think if you were going to do if someone writes a history book about this, one of the hypotheticals would it have been better to do a location where you were building a reservoir, next to an existing dam. And there were a couple of proposals to do that in the Snowy scheme. I mean, we had Snowy had about 4 pumped hydro possibilities, and one of them was building a dam. I think it was adjacent to Jindabyne, actually. So that would have been a much smaller project. But
So are you saying that if you had your time over?
No, I'm not saying that at all, because I don't see how you'd get 350 gigawatt hours any other way. And I think having that really deep storage is going to be very valuable.
We are in the world we're in.
And we are where we are. Exactly. That's right.
Okay.
You can't live your life backwards, as they say.
I'd like to say thanks very much, Mr. Turnbull, for being on the Energy Insiders podcast. It's absolutely wonderful to hear those thoughts. I've learned such a lot. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm a great fan of the podcast, and I'm glad we had the opportunity to have the hard rock joke.
We'll try it again another time one day.
You know that the geologist joke, don't you? That I heard in first year at high school, which I'm the same age as you. Always be nice, and you'll never be taken for granted. But yes,
Yeah, exactly.
What a way to end the podcast episode.
Brilliant. I love it. See you later. Bye.
Okay. We're back with the Energy Insiders podcast with Giles Parkinson and David Leach. David, Malcolm Turnbull was, as usual, entertaining and
infinitely entertaining. He was very insightful, and what an honour it is to have him as guest on the podcast. And if all our guests could talk politics as well as Mr. Turnbull can, we
wouldn't be in this pickle.
We the rest is politics, and we might actually be making a living. But go on.
Yeah, no, look, it's interesting. Now, pumped hydro has proven hard to deliver in Australia. Snow 2.0 has created a lot of controversy because of its delays and because of its cost overruns. I was interested in Malcolm's response when I suggested, well, maybe some smaller projects might have a better outcome. All that said, there's one other project being built, Kidston, and there's a couple of others in the pipeline. One has a contract. Who knows what the heck Queensland's doing with its pumped hydro projects. It's cancelled one and will probably cancel the other one, although you never quite know. Does the eSIM, does the new market rules solve the pumped hydro problem?
That's a good question, since we haven't seen the eSIM contracts and we don't even know if gas will be allowed in there.
Well, there you go. We don't know the answer to that, so there you go.
Sorry, that's right. I should have just said that. I don't know. What I do know is an article that you published today on Renew Economy, pointing out that in New South Wales, as you alluded to in the podcast, I think there's something like a gigawatt of new battery contracts that have been awarded LTESAs, and actually some LTESA projects have actually been built in contrast to CIS projects. And the distinguishing feature of those batteries is that they're all very long duration compared to what people would have been thinking even a couple of years ago, aren't they, Giles?
Well, they are. Well, if you think about the first battery, the Tesla big battery at Hornsdale, it was just over 1 hour of storage. These ones have won contracts to deliver 8 hours of storage. Some of them are actually sized at, there's the Bannaby BESS line being built by BWESS, which is 11.5 hours of storage. Now, some of that's to sort of cater for degradation over the 14-year contract. But there's another 10.6 hours, 10.8 hours, 1.2 gigawatts of capacity in total, 12 gigawatt hours of storage, and pumped hydro's nowhere to be seen. So that's really interesting. And the prices have come down. The prices have now come down to a level that is competitive with, or close to competitive with, pumped hydro, based on the one pumped hydro project that got up last time. So that is really interesting. And these are really big projects. I mean, one, two, three of them, just looking here, 4 of them are bigger than anything that's actually currently operating on the grid in Australia. 2 of them at least are bigger than anything that will be completed by the end of this year. So we're looking at bigger and better batteries. And then on the same day, Octopus Australia announces it's bought 2 battery projects, one a solar hybrid in Queensland, which is quite small, another one next to this other Bannaby project. So there's actually 3 of them in that place, because Ampere got Swallowtail. But this one bought by Octopus is 1.2 gigawatts and 4.8 gigawatt hours. Now, look, that's just indicative because I'm rattling on.
Well, you're rattling off a lot of numbers, Giles. Let me ask you this number. Excluding all that stuff you've just talked about, not counting one kilowatt hour of it, what do you think is going? How much utility batteries in gigawatts are we actually have and are building under construction and commissioning and operating in the NEM? What do you reckon the number is?
I hate it when you ask me a question, you know the number and I don't. But look, it's about 60 gigawatts.
15 gigawatts.
Oh, okay.
15 gigawatts, and that's about 40 gigawatt hours. So although when you listen to Parliament, you would think that everything was, or read in the mass media, you think everything was about home batteries, and there's no doubt that home batteries are an incredible success. Just ask John Grimes. And they are a great success. You've got one yourself. But the fact is that utility batteries are still like about, I don't know, let's say 5 times more important at the moment. And these announcements today are like another home battery scheme all by itself. And so the fact is, it's not just the amount of batteries in terms of power, gigawatts that are being built, well, except it is, but it's also about their duration. But really, the quantity is now not just about what it's going to do to price, it's what it's going to do to volume. So if, peak volume in the NEM is about 20 gigawatts of power, and most of that is coming at, or let's say it's 25 gigawatts, and most of that is coming from coal at the moment in Victoria, in New South Wales, and in Queensland, and all of a sudden you've got 15 gigawatts of batteries wanting a piece of that 6 p.m. Slot. Something's got to give, hasn't it?
It does indeed. Yeah, absolutely.
And it's not just price that gives, because no one wants to give up their volume. That's what makes the price go down. They compete on price to retain volume. But in the end, there's only so much volume to go around, so someone's going to miss out. Now, let me ask you this, Giles, while we're going on questions. Who's got the highest variable cost, coal or batteries?
Highest variable cost?
Yes.
It'd be batteries, wouldn't it?
No.
Okay. I misunderstood your question.
Well,
or I'm really that
the
dumb.
coal generation's got to pay for the coal, right?
Well, yeah, but I mean, what I'm saying, okay, I understand. I thought you sort of the higher variability because the batteries sort of charge and discharge.
The battery charges. But, provided the battery can charge at less than the cost of coal, to translate it into electricity.
Yeah.
So let's say a coal generator charges, it costs them, I don't know, $50, $60, $70 a megawatt hour. It's different whether you're in Victoria or Queensland. But it's one of those numbers. And then a battery can charge. What does it cost a battery to charge in the middle of the day? Right now, not very much.
Yes, but for one battery earlier on this afternoon, quite a lot, depending on what's happening. But mostly not very much. Yes, absolutely.
Yes. It cost one battery maybe $20,000 to charge a megawatt hour to charge.
But that was a quirk of the system. I just want to point out, David, that New South Wales now say they've pretty much met their storage targets with all the batteries that they've commissioned, and they're going to be doing another round of this later on this year. So they've met what was originally their target under the Renewable Infrastructure Plan. They've now met their increased target once they realised that they needed more storage than they thought, and they're pretty much on their way to meet their even adjusted target, which is even higher, to give them more sort of wriggle room and more more room when those coal-fired generators do retire. So it's kind of interesting when they're sort of saying, "Oh, we can't keep these, we can't close these things now because we don't have enough batteries." I mean, maybe they're short of wind and solar bulk energy. But I also note that Eraring seems to be having problems signing the contract with the coal mine that it needs to supply.
Mayuma.
Yes, well, that's right, and it's not getting. It's offered a 1-year deal, which was refused, and it's offered a 3-year deal, which was refused because the coal mine reckons it's going to keep on losing a couple
$40
of
million a year.
Well, there you go. So, and I also see that Origin apparently doesn't want to tap into the New South Wales Government Office. They're interesting stuff. So things might not be quite as simple as they seem.
I think the bottom line is that once all these batteries are built, that coal generation will lose revenue in the evening peak. And as you can see from that Centennial Coal, Bampu, Mayuma, whichever you want to call it, In fact, coal is costing way more than it used to because the mines have been worked out. And without government support, I reckon within 18 months, this is my personal opinion, Eraring would actually be struggling quite hard. You might recall that, in fact, it's not really about energy or even power. So that's the real problem with Eraring from a EMO's point of view. From a EMO's point of view, it's about system services, and that's we have to. And for them, the critical path is about the syncons that have to be installed. So even though we're building all these batteries, and every one of those battery developers to a person will tell you that they could do the same job as the syncons, AEMO isn't having any of it just now.
Just now. They want to do this trial. And that's going to be one of the interesting things happening this year is that when they do that trial, 100 megawatt isolated part of the grid, presumably somewhere with a bit of load and a bit of wind and a bit of solar and some battery storage, and they're going to be testing that sort of engines off, the sort of thing that we've already seen at isolated and remote mines, which have been going sort of wind, solar and batteries for 5 or 6 days at a time. They want to test this on a much bigger grid, and I think if they can actually see the proof of that using battery grid-forming inverters, then we're going to be a lot way more advanced, as Nicola Falcon from AEMO discussed with us in a podcast last year.
So now the only shoe that's still left to drop is some of these big wind farms, particularly in New South Wales, that still need to get to FID. That still seems to be months and months away. In the meantime, we're going to get on with building solar and batteries, and I think myself, you can already see evidence in the electricity prices. I think that they are starting to flatten out. There's been endless talk about how they were lower this last spring in the December quarter than they were the year before. That has continued into January, notwithstanding the price spikes that we're seeing from all the heat at the moment. And as more and more of these batteries come online, I expect to see not just the price falling, which is what actually consumers care about, but the generators care about volume and revenue, and they're going to lose revenue. Coal generation is already down in the last 90 days across the NEM, 90 days compared to the previous 90 days. That's a loss of volume, is a loss of revenue, and that loss of revenue is a direct loss of profit, and they are becoming less profitable.
That's pretty interesting stuff. Well, David, thank you very much.
Interesting as Malcolm Turnbull talking about the coalition, but or suggesting that one of the teals might be Prime Minister, but it'll have to do for us, won't it?
Which at least they declare their intention to want to be Prime Minister. I had something else to say, but I've completely forgotten what it is now, so we shall move on. I do remember it now. The first solar battery hybrid in the NEM has started testing this week. Has been interesting. An interesting time of it, actually, apparently tripping over some of the rules as it goes along. But what's interesting about that is there's about 22 contracted solar hybrid projects, all of them much bigger, and many dozens more in the pipeline that want to get built over the next couple of years. So this is the first example of a technology which I think will fundamentally change the grid over the next coming years, and it's quite interesting. So there you go.
And with thanks to our sponsors,
Evergen and Pylon. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, of course, to Malcolm Turnbull for joining us on this podcast today. Good luck in Canberra next week. Thanks to you, David, for keeping Malcolm on his toes and us all informed about the latest things in the market and this analysis of the coal-fired generators. And we've published a story from David which goes into some of that detail.
Let's not worry about that now. Yes.
Well, no, we're going to point out people. Go to our website, please. It's free, as is this podcast. Thank you very much. We'll be back with another episode of the Energy Insiders podcast next week. Keep a lookout. There's some really good episodes of the Switched On podcast, talking about balcony solar and some other issues, and the Solar Insiders podcast and the Driven podcast returns with a new episode next week as well.
Oh, did you notice, while we're talking about that, the European free trade deal or trade deal is coming along, and that may well lead to European cars becoming somewhat cheaper in Australia?
Well, that'll be an interesting dynamic, because what we did see, actually, let's continue this conversation for a bit longer. What we did see in the January sales was the Chinese cars just completely dominate the latest month. I mean, Tesla, which used to have 2/3 of the market in Australia, just going back 3 years now, is, well, this is a 1 month, and they usually start the corner slow, but this was particularly bad, just 7 or 8% of the market. And they fell behind BYD, which now has 4 times as many sales, plus Geely, plus Kia. So they're now down in 4th place. It's an extraordinary turnaround. And I've got to say, I listened to
looking at these little stats, and we really have to wind this up, otherwise it'll be tomorrow. We do note that Chinese car sales in general were well down this January because they've ended some tax incentives and things in China. So it's not uncommon for a Chinese manufacturer for its sales to be down about 30% this January compared to the previous January. But it's also worth remembering that in January, nothing happens in China at all.
Yeah, okay. And just getting back on Tesla, if anyone's interested, just listen. It's on their website, the opening 60 seconds or 2 minutes of their analyst calls with shareholders and analysts. And Elon Musk rambles on for 2 minutes, and I think it's true to say that no other CEO in the world talks like that, and I'm not too sure that's supposed to be a compliment. Quite extraordinary stuff for the most richest person in the world and one of the most valuable companies in the world. There you go. It's a funny way to end the podcast. Thank you very much, David. Thanks to our sponsors once again. We'll see you next week. Bye for now.